Welcome to Comsverse. This session is Succeeding with Microsoft Teams in Mixed Technology Communication Environments. And today will be presented to you by Steve Blackman. Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my session, Succeeding with Microsoft Teams in a Mixed Tech Communications Environment. That's easy for you to say. Hopefully, by the end of the session, you'll understand exactly what it is that we are describing here. So without further ado, I will dive into our session overview here, the agenda for this afternoon's session. I'll give you an overview, exactly what we're going to be looking at. I'm going to be defining what we mean by mixed tech comms environment. Hell of a title. And I'll be explaining exactly what we mean by that. I'll also be relaying to you what has become a very familiar customer conversation, and certainly in my working day, both here at Pexip and in my former life. The conversation with customers and around Teams has become very familiar, and I'll run through exactly what we're hearing other customers say. I'm going to be talking about the Teams workflow, the Meet in My Cloud conundrum. I'll go into more details and explain that as well. Accelerating timelines. Thanks very much, COVID. I think that's been a big subject for a lot of the sessions at Comsverse this year, but it's true. It really has changed the way that we work, and it is pushing IT teams into action faster than perhaps they had planned for. I'll be introducing the most complex part of the requirement. That'll be your user base. And I'll also be diving into Microsoft CVI Cloud Video Interop program and certified providers. So I think that, you know, from the title itself and from the name of the organization that I work for, I think you've got a pretty good idea of the subject matter for today's session, and I'll be talking through that program, that predefined program of Cloud Video Interop, and what we see as the 5 steps to success with Cloud Video Interop. I'll have a quick dig behind the scenes, so you know exactly what is going on behind the scenes, the hamster in the wheel kind of thing, and finishing up with the user experience, which is the all-important part of the CVI experience. So, overview of what we'll be talking about. I think we know COVID really has accelerated some of the decisions organizations are making, but even before COVID, you know, Teams was the fastest growing business application that Microsoft has ever released. You know, single interface for all things collaboration and communication, both with inside your organization and with external users. You'll see this from the typical customer conversation. So a lot of organizations have invested extensively over the years in other video communication solutions. It's an investment that they want to be able to continue to leverage. Some interesting anecdotes when I hit the next slide in relation to that sweating of assets as far as that existing technology goes. But what we're also seeing is an acceleration of Teams adoption, right? We're all working from home, you know, adverts for Teams on the television. My wife, my son, you know, they're using this at college. It's accelerated the adoption of Teams, and I said that has galvanized IT teams across the country into action in looking for a solution so that they can create this workflow, this productivity gain that they're getting from Teams, and take that and mix that with their existing technology environments. So in terms then of what we actually mean by a mixed tech communications environment, it might be surprising to know just how many video solutions, video meeting room solutions are available now natively for Microsoft Teams. It's absolutely huge. And a lot of organizations, greenfield site, or they're upgrading their existing video estate, they're adopting the simplicity of that environment. It's so easy to be able to join a meeting from a Microsoft Teams room, from a Microsoft Teams client. But my focus is really on those organizations that do have this mixed estate of video solutions. I started work at my previous employer back in 2003, and video was already a very well established market. They were a big player in that space. A lot of organizations still got systems dating back to the early 2010s that they want to be able to use in this modern workflow environment. Interesting anecdote. Some of the pictures, some of you may recognise on the screen here, of some of this legacy equipment. The Polycom or Polyspan view station unit there. This is one of the first video conferencing devices, all-in-one video conferencing appliances. And I had the pleasure of meeting with, it was a large German manufacturer, and we came into a room. The guy wanted to be able to hook up, connect with some of the other offices, and he wheeled out from a cabinet. I kid you not, and this was as recently as 3 years ago. He wheeled out from the cabinet a view station on top of a CRT monitor. I sniggered. He looked at me very sternly and said, "Why not? It works." And that's exactly the case here. So there's a lot of productivity tied up in those environments. He knew exactly how to get on a video call, and we were up and running with a connection to his colleagues in no time at all. That is the kind of productivity that we want to include in this journey to Teams. Now, this is a very, very familiar conversation I'm having with customers on a daily basis. Standards-based video endpoints within inside the organization that you need to be able to continue to leverage, realize that investment, and ensure its continued productivity in that environment. You've also got the need to connect with business partners and customers using your chosen workflow, i.e. that Teams environment. But when they may not have Teams themselves, when they may not have the video devices that work natively with Teams, it's a common conundrum. The meet in my cloud scenario, even if you've got 100% native Teams, external parties that you invite to your Teams meetings might not be using a native Teams device or client. They may want to use traditional group meeting solutions to join in your Teams meeting, and that's fine. Absolutely, you've adopted this workflow. It's a nice, easy way to create those meetings and invite participants in. But what you need to be able to do is to offer them a route into your meeting. So this is the video interop function, and this is something that you provide as part of your tenant effectively. So you own the video interop piece, and you bring in your partners, your business partners and customers through that. It's crucial that any interop function effectively provides not only seamless access to your Teams meetings, but using a familiar workflow and user experience on those existing devices, as well as for those native Teams users. I mentioned accelerated timelines, no secrets here. We were planning to head back to the office. That is going to be an interesting experience. Social distancing within the office means that, you know, you're going to end up with fewer people in meeting rooms. You are going to have a policy of keeping those meeting rooms clean. Between calls, you know, you may even want to consider alternatives to the traditional method of getting into meetings, you know, some sort of zero touch kind of meeting experience. All of these are considerations as we start to return back to the new normal in the office. And of course, all of these users that are coming back will have gotten used to the Teams workflow, working from home, and it's a workflow that they want to bring back into the office and not have it compromised by any of the existing systems in play. So with all the complexities of this mixed tech environment, you know, the most complex part of any of these deployments is the users themselves. Keeping those users productive, and of course keeping the senior execs happy as a result of doing that. So we don't underestimate this part of the jigsaw puzzle when it comes to providing an interop function for your Microsoft Teams environment. Fortunately, there is a very well-defined mechanism for the provision of video interop from certified partners. This is defined by Microsoft. It's built into the Microsoft Teams environment, and it allows for calls to come in from standards-based VTC systems, video teleconference systems, VC systems, H323. There's a certification program that ensures that the partners providing this particular functionality are delivering it in a way that is fit for purpose and fits in that Teams environment. It's really easy to subscribe to. I'll run through some of that, and it offers that familiar meeting scheduling function. So I'm going to talk through the 5 steps of success with CVI, Cloud Video Interop. It is part of the Microsoft Teams environment. It's not an alien invader. It's baked right into Microsoft Teams. It's a third-party provided solution, but Microsoft, as I said, has a certification program. Currently, there are 3 players who are providing CVI functionality. I'll run through each of these steps in order, calling out some of the expectations and some of the considerations for each one of those stages. Now, the 5-step plan here, deploying CVI in organizations, is actually taken from Microsoft documentation. There is a link to that at the bottom of the slide here. So I'm not reinventing this. I'm calling out, as I've already mentioned, that this is a function baked into Microsoft Teams. So planning your adoption of CVI, video interop, cloud video interop. As I mentioned, there are currently 3 certified providers of CVI, and your vendor selection usually involves a number of factors. Price of the service, absolutely. Availability, so you know, from a geographical perspective, quality of the experience. Usually, you'll take a proof of concept or a trial in order to experience that yourself. It is, of course, possible to run all 3 of these video interop functions at the same time on your tenant. Allocate one or other to your user base. Different users can have different services. You can trial all 3 of them side by side, so you get a feel for that quality of experience. Some of the other considerations that I think you'll usually take into consideration for vendor selection, things like security, reliability. What happens to your data in that provider's network environment? How do I know that any information stored is secure, is protected? Where do you store it? Who has access to it? These are common questions that I'm asked when it comes to you know, the CVI trial on our service. And at the end of the day, you know, a lot of this information we have documented, this being Pexip, have documented and available to customers, but it's an important part of the discussion. So your choice of the environment based upon, you know, some of these factors here, security, reliability, data protection, might well push you towards a self-hosted solution. So, you know, data sovereignty then within your four walls, borders of your organization. You'll also want to look at ease of onboarding. How easy is it to get this up and running? How easy is it for the provider then to give you the experience, the time to getting that up and running? All parts of the consideration. Some additional functionalities that you might want to consider as part of your choice here: endpoint registration, cloud call control. You may be retiring or want to retire your existing BC call control element. You might have that on premise right now. It may be that you've already deprecated that and moved to Skype for Business as the native registration for some of your video systems. If that's the case, you may want to be considering registration of those endpoints to a third party, a cloud call control environment, and that could be part of your decision criteria. Branding, you know, the landing page for the service, you want that to reflect your company's image, not promoting somebody else's brand on that image. You'll want to have a nice, easy to remember domain name for dialing, for instance. So custom domain for the invitations, and I want to show those in just a second. You know, teams@mydomain.com is a lot easier to remember than you know, cryptic number at somebody else's cryptic domain kind of setting. So teams@mydomain.com would be an important consideration. Easy for me to say, differentiated lobby bypass, trusted, untrusted. One of the experiences natively with Teams is that you can have external parties coming through a lobby. You want internal parties to be able to join the meeting directly. We can replicate that using trusted, untrusted designation for endpoints connecting through the service. So it's not an all or nothing kind of lobby bypass function. Step two, once you've chosen your vendor or vendors, you know, we're now taking the step to implement this, to configure your environment to take advantage of that. So there'll be licensing to consider. There'll be review of firewalls, network requirements. Absolutely, you're using video interop. You're sending your video traffic out to a public network space. That is then connecting into to Teams. Whereas before you might have held those video calls on premise. Now they're being driven out into the Microsoft cloud. If you want one-touch join as a way of connecting into the Teams meeting, I'll describe that in a second as well. You'll be wanting to set up room resources, room accounts for the endpoints so that can be facilitated. So those rooms can be booked using Exchange, for instance. Steps to getting the service up and running. The first one is you're granting Azure consent for the vendor's video interop app, so it becomes a trusted application effectively in your Azure AD. So a relatively simple step. You're simply telling your environment that you're going to be accepting that application as a provider of video connectivity into your meetings. Onto the provisioning. This really is a very, very straightforward step. And what you're doing is you're simply populating the predefined video interop policy in your tenant with the app ID of the chosen provider's interop service. I mentioned this is baked into Microsoft Teams. There is a receptacle ready for that information. So it's simply populating that with the data that you get from your interop provider. They'll supply those details. There'll be a couple of PowerShell commandlets to run to enable that service on your particular domain, and in the case of Pexip, those particular scripts are sent to you pre-populated with the information, things like the application ID. This is what uniquely identifies the CVI application that you will be using. So it's not the same as anybody else's. This is generated and provided by your Interop provider. You'll get a simple email with the PowerShell script with all of this information in, and you simply run that against its tenant. The final step is granting users the right to use this. And as I mentioned, you can have different users using different services. So it doesn't have to be everyone using the same service provider. You can distribute this amongst your users. But again, that's a very simple process of granting that access to users. I like to think of this process as easy as filling your glass with your favorite soda. All three flavors are available and can be enabled together. You allocate a particular service to a particular user. You can chop and change that, but it really is as simple as picking your favorite soda and filling your glass. We move on to the scheduling. This is where we've actually got this in play now, and it's the workflow that your Teams users are used to using. So, usual workflow: Outlook, Outlook Web Access, Teams desktop client, your Teams mobile client. You're generating a familiar meeting invitation, and it's now including some additional details. These details are effectively the information that you provided during the provisioning, the data behind the scenes that allows the video interop provider to interpret the Teams meeting, to find the Teams meeting where your VC system will join. All of this is done by virtue of the previous steps. So those PowerShell commandlets effectively allowing you to allocate the service to users in your organization, and they then have this additional information. There's no plugins, there's no change to the workflow, there's no additional choices to make. So you're not having to have your users make a decision at the start of the meeting whether or not someone is going to be joining from a standards-based device. They're embracing that Teams workflow totally. From a joining perspective, there are a number of ways of joining the meeting. Manual dial via entry queue. This may be how external parties, your business customers and partners, are joining your Teams meetings. So in this instance, then they will dial the default entry queue, Teams at mydomain.com, for instance, and then use DTMF tones, dial tones, to enter the conference ID into the meeting. It might be that they dial the full string automatically, and you can have an additional line at the bottom of the invitation. For instance, on this invitation here, direct dial via VTC conference ID at mydomain.com. So somebody could use that, combine the conference ID with the at mydomain.com address, and dial that from their standards-based video endpoint. If you've got a Cisco endpoint, you can use a touch panel macro to allow you to enter the conference ID based upon the default domain. So that Teams at mydomain.com, for instance, is embedded here in the macro. And when you initiate a Teams call, you're simply asked for the conference ID. Nice and straightforward to be able to punch that in. A lot easier than using DTMF tones, in my personal experience. Of course, one-touch join, I mentioned this earlier. If you can schedule, if you can calendar a video endpoint, i.e. it can read and exchange calendar, we can parse the information contained within that invite, identify what the conference ID and the domain is for that meeting, and generate a dial string that appears behind a join button on the screen of your video endpoint. Now, this is for Cisco and for Polycom endpoints. Other devices may not have the ability to be scheduled or calendared, for instance, may not have a calendaring function. So potentially there is another way of joining a meeting. QR code, personal calendar app. This is actually something that's only available on the Pexip service, and this puts the meeting join function in the hands of the user. So rather than driving it to the endpoint in the room, this allows the user then to have the calendar invite on their personal device that they can use then in conjunction with either a QR code, which is identifying the endpoint in the meeting room, or from a drop-down list on their personal device of the meeting rooms available to them. I like to think of this as potentially a zero-touch dial method of joining the meeting, because you're not actually having to touch the control panel or the remote control on the device in the meeting room. I mentioned I'd dig into what's occurring behind the scenes, so the hamster in the wheel. So CVI architecture and functional blocks, relatively straightforward. At the end of the day, we're taking a video stream, video and a content stream potentially from a standards-based video endpoint. That uses a traditional AVC video stream negotiated by that endpoint with the transcode and protocol translation engine in this instance. So that video endpoint will negotiate the most appropriate connection for its capabilities. And then the CVI partner provided functional block within the cloud environment provides a transcode of that video stream, and it transcodes it into multiple resolutions or multiple streams of different resolutions for both the video and for the content. And this is because the participants in the Teams meeting are effectively all requesting different image resolutions from all of the other participants in order to build up what you see on the screen. So somebody in a meeting room environment, for instance, Microsoft Teams room, might well be requesting higher resolution video images from participants in the meeting. Somebody on a mobile client, for instance, might be using or requesting lower resolution streams. Effectively, this is a simulcast transmission, and the job of the CVI components in the cloud are to transcode the video coming in from that video endpoint into those multiple streams, but also to take those multiple streams from the Teams meeting and encode them into a single composite video stream that goes back out to that video endpoint. The net result is that everybody sees what they would normally expect to see on the screen. The experience isn't changed for anyone. Now, each of the VC systems connecting into a Teams meeting effectively comes in through its own instance of that transcode and interop engine. So each and every VC endpoint is having its video and its content transcoded into the multiple streams required for that Microsoft Teams environment. And conversely, those video streams are being transcoded and creating a composite image sent back to the video endpoint. All of this makes geography an important part of the decision, because each VTC is using its own instance of transcode and interop engine. You need to have a provider that gives you access to a quality network directly for connection into that transcode and interop function, because The connections coming into your Teams meeting could be from anywhere within your own organization or from organizations external. At the end of the day, you want them to enjoy the quality experience of that Teams meeting that you are enjoying as well. So geography is important, given that each VC endpoint connects in through its own instance. Final piece of the jigsaw puzzle here, the all-important user experience. So however they join the meeting, right, whichever mechanism they choose, use, or are forced to use to join the meeting, at the end of the day, each and every one of those participants will experience the kind of video that they're used to seeing. So on the left-hand side here, a native VTC, video teleconference, VC endpoint. This is an example of a Cisco room. You know, they will want to have a high-quality video experience optimized with a layout for their screens in that meeting room. They will also want the ability to receive and send content at native resolution. So bear in mind that endpoint will negotiate a connection into the CVI environment based upon its capabilities, and the CVI engine then is performing that transcode and ensuring the quality is maintained for that video user or video users in the meeting room there. Dual screen or single screen systems, you know, the configuration and the way in which content is presented is very much down to the endpoint. But dual and single screen systems supported on all of the CVI functionality, and it's important, or very often important, if you've got a memory of a goldfish like myself, to have, you know, for instance, name overlay. So a roster and a name overlay of the participants in that meeting. That's all provided through the CVI function as well. On the Teams side, you'll have your preferred layout, and each one of those video systems is effectively appearing as a native Teams user in that meeting. Content, as I said, bidirectional. Collaboration happens exactly how you expect collaboration to happen in that environment. That all adds up to productive users and happy bosses, happy execs, and for me that spells success. So cloud video interop. When you've got to mix your tech, CVI very well be the answer. Thank you very much for staying with me, guys. I do have a breakout room available after this for questions. There will be some time, I notice, for questions during this session. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of the sponsors for this fantastic event. This has just been absolutely amazing. Wouldn't have been possible without the sponsors and of course the hard work of the organisers behind the scenes as well. Absolutely first rate. So with that, I will sign off. Hand back to my producer, who will make the link to the breakout room available, and also help me with the questions that you guys might have at the end of the session here. So thank you very much, Tom.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve. Just a reminder that you can use the Q&A functionality to ask any questions you have for Steve. We have some time for those questions, so do make use of that. And I put a link to the post-session networking as well. Just actually, whilst we're waiting for any more questions, there's one I just want to cover that was asked earlier. I know you mentioned people kind of returning into the office. Is there, for those people, is there one, if they could take away one thing from this session that they should do, is there a kind of, if you do nothing else, do this kind of?
It's a good question. Absolutely, yes. I mean, I can imagine, you know, there's a certain amount of anxiety about you know, heading back into the office environment. You know, those users will have adopted a workflow. Don't change that, right? Embrace that. The use of the equipment, the systems in the office. I'm sure that your IT teams, your HR teams will be ensuring that anything that needs to be done in terms of the distancing in that environment, the cleanliness of that environment is is up to scratch to allay any of those fears. But yeah, heading back into the office. Video is a great productivity tool. 70% of human communications is actually non-verbal. So it's really, really important to continue using those solutions to maintain your productivity, possibly even more important now, given the restrictions there may well be in that office environment. You're not going to be making as many visits to see customers, business partners. Video is an incredibly important part of that continuity.
Fantastic. Okay, that's all the time we have for this session. If you'd like to talk with Steve following the session, reminder that he will be in the session breakout area. So check the Q&A for the link to that breakout area. Thank you very much for watching.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye now.